professor of eminence at Tezpur University, which is in Assam. He retired as a professor from University of Hyderabad. It's the Central University of Hyderabad. He has been involved in various projects, committees associated with diaspora studies. He has been one of the founder director of Center for Diaspora Studies, which is in Hyderabad University. He has also been a member of the high-level committee, which was initiated by the Ministry of External Affairs in 2000 to look into issues concerning the diaspora. He has also been part of the policy planning of the high-level committee, which was initiated by the Ministry of External Affairs in 2000. He has many articles and books to his credit, which are essentially on diaspora issues. Let me welcome Professor Bhatt.
It's my pleasure indeed to speak to you on the theme of diaspora from whatever experiences I've gained over the last 20-25 years, ever since I started working on diaspora issues.
Let me start by asking you, what got you started? What interested you in this topic?
I think it's just a matter of life chance. When I happened to be in London carrying out postdoctoral studies, there was one of the anthropologists, very distinguished anthropologist, Adrian C. Mayer, who had done studies of Fiji. First ethnography of Fiji Indians was done by Adrian Mayer, and he said, why don't you take up a study of Indians in London or in the United Kingdom. So that's the first initiative to take up a study of Indians overseas. And that time it was not the concept of diaspora which was prominent. We were all talking about overseas Indians. We had a number of publications during that tenure, that phase of era of globalization, that we had overseas Indians or people abroad, Indians abroad. These were the terms used those days.
This was in which year?
This was in 84-85. I happened to be in London during 84-85, during which this whole idea of studying overseas Indians came up, and I pursued it even after my return. I started teaching a course on overseas Indians those days. A couple of publications have been there written by our civil servants who have been retired ambassadors to those various countries. And this overseas Indian was a very popular term, and I started introducing that course to the master's students as an optional course in sociology, and took me about another 10 years to really start a project on diaspora with the starting of Center for the Study of Indian Diaspora. I had the support from the University Grants Commission to start a program under their area studies program. So it became a reality in 1996 after a global conference on Indian diaspora. The first, perhaps the first conference on Indian diaspora was held in Hyderabad University, and I had the privilege of being a coordinator of that conference. So then on, the whole negotiations or the interactions with the diaspora has come up, and now in the 21st century we have a very different kind of linkages and interactions with the diaspora, very much connected with home, because till then they were all people in their own country, living in the environment that they have been either in England or South Africa or any other country. Connection back home was much limited. First of all, there was no official recognition of the diasporic communities overseas, because Government of India did not recognize them. Not that they didn't have much of interaction. They had their interactions back home with their communities or with number of organizations. But then officially it was only in 2002 that the Government of India recognized the presence of overseas Indians, gave them a official status, and then on there have been much stronger linkages building up between India and the Indian diaspora. So this is the story of transformation of Indian overseas people, starting from the mid 19th century to the level of transnational communities established in 2000 and beyond. Now we have a global Indian diaspora which is well connected. They keep meeting each other, and one of the important policy decisions they had made during the high level committee's deliberations was to start a Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. This is generally done during the month of January between 7th to 9th, and this is the occasion when Indians overseas come, deliberate, discuss among themselves, discuss with the government of India, discuss with the various partners, whether in business or in culture, etc., back home in India, and return and connect much stronger way as the years pass by. So again in January they will have a Pravasi Bharati Divas. 2013 will be in Kochi, which will be again a repetition of what has been happening from 2003 onwards. It's a continuous linkage, negotiating and engaging diaspora by the government of India.
Thank you. Why do you think it is important to establish a center and academically engage with the whole issue of diaspora? Could you tell us?
See, the Indian student community, for instance, or even teaching community, hardly knows about one part of India's history which has led to the movement of Indians overseas. They have been a part of Indian history and continue to be Indian in terms of their thoughts, in terms of their ways of life, and they claim they are Indians at heart, though they may be citizens of some other country. And that is something which is not known to the Indians here. And I thought a course on Indians overseas who have moved away but at the same time retained Indianness, pursue their culture, their customs, practices, etc. away from India, as far away as a distant Trinidad or Tobago in the Caribbean, or in Fiji, Mauritius and so on. In all the countries you find them very distinct communities, quite separate, different than the others who are there in those countries. So Indian presence abroad need to be brought into the main discourse in India's academic world. So that was one of the ideas of bringing into the academic teaching and start a center which will provide both courses, teaching, as well as research in the domain which has been not carried out from the Indian side. There have been a couple of studies on Indians overseas by others outside India, but from within the Indian academics there's hardly any work done. So I thought this will be a very important area which need to be covered.
In the course of your long experience of teaching and engaging with the diaspora issue, what do you think seems to be the general shift or changes in the kind of research areas that people are exploring? In your time in the 80s and 90s, research orientation or concerns or even themes might have been slightly different from the present engagement. Could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, it was, the study of Indians overseas was mostly as ethnic minority groups. They have been embedded in those countries as ethnic minority groups. So everyone tried to carry out studies to see how these ethnic minority groups have been adjusting with the culture in a distant land. How do they incorporate new values and customs of life to which they are exposed in those countries. So there is a kind of cultural adaptation, adjustment and so on. There were also hopes that some of these Indians will assimilate entirely with those populations there, which did not happen because the Indianness still continued, and Indian way of life was something which was so much inherent. They had carried that cultural baggage with them that they wanted to be quite different. So we find Indians retaining those identities. So the whole issue of maintenance of identity, the changes that have occurred among the Indians overseas, and the response from the other side, the host side. How do they treat you, the Indians there in those countries? These are some of the basic issues which were initially pursued by sociologists. But in course of time, today we talk about in terms of diaspora much more connected. It was the ethnic minority groups in up to 1960s, 70s, and almost 80s, and then comes the diasporic dialogue, because after mid 90s you find diasporic dialogue becoming much more significant, because before that you never had this word diaspora so much popular, and today we talk diaspora, Indian diaspora or Chinese diaspora and so on. The specific connotation of the word diaspora is to connect back with the motherland. So Indians have been now connected back with the motherland, which was not the case earlier. The connections were imaginary connections, did exist, but then they were not so vibrant. Today, with the possibility of transport, communication, and feeling that you could always move from your place to the your motherland and go back to your place, has become much more common, and then comes this whole idea of diaspora. Essentially it centers around the linkage with the motherland. The earlier Indian overseas were just connected with the host country, they were not linking back. They have been sending money, remittances and so on in some of the cases, but then the whole recognition that they have something to do with the motherland has come up only after the mid-90s, and then on the studies on Indian diaspora have become more and more popular.
I'm sure the telecommunication technologies have greatly mediated these connections. But do you think there is a degree of difference between the kind of connections, the content and the nature of connection between the old and the new diaspora?
They have very much they are very much different from one another, just because they have been away from India for 150 years, the old diaspora. During this course of 150 years, so much has gone through, and they have their own identity as Indians there, which is very different than the Indian identity back home in India. We take it for granted. When I spoke to a person from Trinidad, Indian from Trinidad, he said, I know more about your culture, Indian culture, than you perhaps know and practice, because we take it for granted. For them, it's a cultivated preservation of Indianness. So they know many of the chantings in India, in the Hindu chantings, or they are more familiar with the Bollywood's films, etc., because they make them more at home when they practice these. So many of our children here will not have bhajans and bhaitaks, etc., on a regular basis, which you find in the diaspora so common. And so that group has preserved the identity of Indian. That's one thing. Number one. Two, they are not really moved from the upper classes of the society. They moved from the lower classes of the society. So they had to do a hard way up from the bottom level, starting from the indentured labor to the professions what they are now in the third or fourth generation. It's a very hard way that they have come up. And the new diaspora is somebody who has gone recently, who have gone after their education in India, and often they are also mentioned as brain drain. They have moved out of India, causing India quite a bit of loss, because their resources are being used by some other countries. Though today we talk about brain gain or brain pool, but at some point of time everyone was saying that it is a loss for India when they have left, because they needed India after her independence to rebuild India in terms of India's advancement, but they are there in distant land to develop those countries. This group comes from upper class and upper caste, etc. And therefore, the two are very different in terms of the worldview. And though modernization, globalization has impact on them, still the mindset has not much changed. So I have seen in New York, overseas, the old Indian diaspora is settled in a place called Richmond Hill, where you find in front of their houses jandas, and they have the chutney music and dance in the same neighborhood. You have typical Indian food from Trinidad, Guyana or Caribbean countries available there, whereas Indians who move from India straight away to Jackson Heights in New York. So you find the Jackson Heights culture, way of life is very different. You have Bombay and other Delhi populations, plus the cuisine and everything available there. You find the streets being almost reconstructed in Jackson Heights, similar to what you find today in India.
Do you see it possible, or do you see instances of these notions which to some extent are tinged with longing and nostalgia of an imaginary India? Do they get ruptured when they actually, make a visit in body, so to say?
I think it's a very, very interesting question. I had experience of talking to several of those who have migrated 150 years ago, and when they come and try to find out their kith and kin back home here in India, they feel, they have remained in the same status. Many of them are in the same condition, living in rural parts of Bhojpuri region in Bihar or UP and so on, or in Tamil Nadu or in Andhra Pradesh, and they feel they are not really used the opportunity which those migrants have made use of. They have gone as labor, but then they have come up. They have been able to build up their knowledge base, they have skills, and they have really come up. So when they come and see them, those who can come and see are obviously people who can really spend some money and come here. They have moved up in their social and economic ladder. They come and visit, try to have the curiosity to find out their kith and kin back home. But many of them are not very happy because they find India has not taken care of their kith and kin. They remain in the same class or social position. So it's a bit of a shock when they come and see. So many of them feel, okay, we know that we have come from those areas. Whatever we can do, we'll try to do for education or providing some healthcare facilities in those villages where they have moved from. So they are looking for partners to philanthropic investments, and to see as a commitment to the people from where they have migrated, the location where they have migrated, to do something good for the community to come up. So this kind of ideas are coming up, and they're trying to support their families or kith and kin back home in India.
Because of these intervention of media technologies and the virtual space that there is for people to come together, there have been a series of networks between and among diasporas, to the extent that some scholars have started to call them transnational communities. Do you think communities is a valid term that can be used for such gathering or coming together?
Yeah, I would prefer to use the word transnational networks than community. In terms of community, when we say in a sociological sense, it is grounded. It has to have a base. Whereas here, it's essentially network communication. So it doesn't get grounded in terms of face-to-face interaction from what we look at. But certainly there is a closer feeling, you communicate with each other, and there are a lot of things in terms of support system which can be initiated. So these networks I look at as social capital. It's a social resource for the communities across, and there are occasions in which they can mutually help each other. But to say that they have really formed communities is something, I think, taking it to a much different level, which I don't think it is happening at the moment. Some of these cyber networks have led to community get-togethers. I may mention here, I have come across some of the people who are in search of their linkages. Now, when there was migration 150 years ago, some of the families were distributed in Mauritius, in Trinidad, in South Africa and so on, to different locations. And what is happening today is, through the network, they try to find out whether any of that family is elsewhere, any other part of the globe, and back in India. So I have seen some of the persons from South Africa, for instance, coming to India, finding out their family linkages. They have gone to Trinidad, they have gone to Mauritius, trying to find out their family, and they have a family get together organized because of these cyber networks. Through the communication networks, they come across each other's relationship, and they have formed a family get together of people coming from all over the globe, which means that the global families are getting together, which has been one of the contributions of this cyber networking. And it may take a real shape when they get together frequently, and when they float number of enterprises together, they may form again a family at the global level of a particular Indian ancestorship. That's what is happening now. I have come across 2 or 3 such persons who have been in search of their linkages and coming to me for discussion, etc. But I'm not sure how much it is going to pick up. But basically, I think we are trying to link with our families wherever they are. So it's happening among the diaspora too.
The 21st century has been, I think, considered the age of migration. Well, there has been migration before, but not to the extent that it has been going on now. And as people move, their cultures move as well.
The 20th century is going to consolidate this further through the networks, and thus I see the interest of the people overseas are becoming more and more intense back home in India. In terms of, anything that happens in India becomes an important issue for them. If something is good about India, they are also very happy. If something not so good about India, they feel very, very unhappy about it. So there is a sharing of these feelings because of this networking and communication and globalization of the 21st century. So what is going to happen, to my understanding, is that these ties will become more consolidated, and thus India is going to extend beyond India in terms of its connectivity and linkages, its interest too. Because if the overseas Indians have interest in India, I'm sure India cannot ignore the interests of the overseas. They have to see their interest. If something happens to them somewhere else, I think government of India or their community back home in India has to also respond and support them in whatever situations they are. So I think there is a continuous linkage and building up of the solidarity of Indians wherever they are, and thus I think it will be mutually beneficial to be connected with each other, which is happening in the 21st century more than ever.
Would you say then that the idea or the notion or the concept of culture needs to be delinked from territory which it's been traditionally associated, and even with ethnicities?
I think it's happening, and it has happened now already for a century or more, I must say. When I visited Mauritius, for instance, I find the cultural geography of India has been transplanted in Mauritius. They have Ganga flowing in Mauritius in a talab. They call it a Ganga talab, and they go for a holy dip and a worship of Shiv on a Shivratri day. So what has happened is, already the culture has been taken to these distant lands. So you cannot separate the migrant from the migrant's cultural moorings or cultural baggage. So I only feel it will be further consolidated. I don't think there is any threat to the issue of retention of culture, it will be further supported, because this continuous linkage back home in India, which is possible today more than ever, because anybody from Mauritius or Trinidad, I'm mentioning these two countries because they have been away from India for a very long time. They still can suddenly come when they want, take a plane and come to attend some wedding here of connected members, invited by some of the members here back home, or visit a temple or a spiritual homes, which is so common today that you have lots of cultural linkages established, perhaps much more stronger way than earlier. So the culture has already gone beyond the borders. So the earlier idea of territory with the culture is no longer is valid. Now culture can grow anywhere. I recall the concept which Arjuna Padrai is one of the leading anthropologists from Chicago, who talks about global flows, wherein you find Indians wherever they have gone, Indian culture also goes with them, and today all the more in the electronic age, they carry with them everything that they want culturally.
Thank you, Professor Bhatt. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time to.
Thank you very much.